We welcome all of you that are with us, all of you that are with us by YouTube and Facebook. We want you to turn tonight to Revelation chapter 17. I'm not sure whether or not we will get to complete this chapter, but chapter 17 and 18 go together, talking about the mother of harlots, the religious abomination of the tribulation period. I'll point out several things to you. This kind of is another parenthetical in that this is inserted. Actually, this judgment has already taken place during the about the middle part of the tribulation period. If you look at verse 8 of chapter 14, you'll see that verse 8 says, there was another angel saying, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. So, and I want to remind you also that when we finished chapter 16 with the seventh veil, we actually ended the tribulation period. So, chapter 17 and 18 are really giving us the details of what happened about 3.5 years ago, about the middle of the tribulation period. Now remember, the tribulation period is made up of 7 years, and we find that there are two sections of it, 3.5 years each, 42 months. The first part is kind of mild. The beast is getting himself established, and then by the middle of the week, when he breaks that covenant that he's made with the Hebrew people, that's in Daniel chapter 9, when he breaks that covenant in the middle of the week, stops the sacrifices and the oblations, then he, along with the help of the second beast, which is the false Messiah or the false prophet, they erect an image of the first beast and put it in the temple that was constructed during the first part of the tribulation period. So, we're actually looking at an event that's already happened, and we're getting the details of the fall of Babylon. Now, make yourself a serious note here. When you think of Babylon, you have a political Babylon, which is represented by the beast, and that confederation of 10 kingdoms that make up the revived Roman Empire. So that's located, headquartered actually in Babylon. But when he talks about the mother of harlots, Babylon is used as a symbolical name for the city of Rome. And so you have a political Babylon and an ecclesiastical or religious Babylon. Is that confusing to you? You've got a political Babylon and a religious Babylon or ecclesiastical, which is made up of apostate religions, Protestant, all denominations, those that are left behind. Now remember, when the rapture occurs, all Christians are going out. So any religious activity has to be with lost, apostate people. So this mother of harlots is composed of a group of unregenerate souls that are apostate. They've fallen away. And so, we need to remember that Babylon means confusion. Babylon means confusion. And when we first hear of Babylon, you have to go all the way back to Genesis chapter 11. And in chapter 11, we hear of an individual by the name of Nimrod. He had a wife by the name of Simiramis, Semiramis, as the wife of Nimrod. And she had a son, and they believed that he was miraculously conceived. And his name was Tammuz. And he supposedly was killed by a wild beast. And he miraculously came back to life and became a part of idol worship. So when we think about Nimrod and the building of the Tower of Babel and the confusion of tongues and his wife and son, we get the beginnings of idol worship, Baal, Ashtaroth, and all of those things that we find in the Bible. So really, Babylon, located on the Euphrates River, is the beginning of false worship. And that's why this political Babylon is actually located there on the Euphrates. But the ecclesiastical Babylon is headquartered in Rome. And we'll see that tonight as we continue to study. So Scofield Bible mentions 7 dooms. Do you see that in your footnotes? Those of you that have a Scofield Bible. He mentions 7 dooms. And the destruction of the religious order of Babylon is called the Doom of Babylon in chapter 17 and 18. With those thoughts in mind, I want us to begin to look at this with the understanding that this has already happened, and happened about 3.5 years in the past with the fall of the mother of harlots and the destruction of that religious order. Now, John says in verse 1 of chapter 17, and there came one of the 7 angels, which had the 7 vials, or the 7 bold judgments. He does not say which one, but one of the 7 that reveal their judgments in chapter 16. There are 7 angels, if you will look back, that were given the responsibility of pouring out wrath and judgment upon the inhabitants of the earth. And I covered that entire chapter last week in our study. So one of the 7, not knowing which one, that had charge of the vials of wrath, talked with me, saying unto me, Come hither. Now this is about the 2nd time we've heard that. You can turn back to chapter 4 and you'll see the invitation, come up hither. So come hither, or come here, and I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters. Now if you'll look at verse 15, you'll see what the many waters represent. Verse 15, look at it. And he saith unto me, The waters which thou sawest, where the whore sitteth, are peoples, and multitudes, and nations, and tongues, or dialects. So, this great whore has control over masses of people. Now we're going to find in verse 2 that the kings of the earth, the kings of the various nations of the earth, have committed fornication. And when we think about fornication or adultery, we normally think of sexual sins. But there is also a spiritual fornication and spiritual adultery. Normally, we think of fornication being illicit affairs between unmarried parties. When we think about adultery, we think about affairs within the ranks of the married parties. That's fornication. So the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, in that they were led by this harlot, this great whore, this religious monstrosity of the tribulation period, to worship idols, and so they committed spiritual fornication. And the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine. She involved kings, nations, and peoples in her fornication, in that she worshiped idols, such as occurred in Babylon back in Genesis chapter 11. And then in verse 3, he carried me away in the Spirit. Carried me away in the Spirit. John said earlier, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's Day, which is the first day of the week. And I saw these things and was commissioned to record. So this is not the first time John has been moved by the Spirit. So the angel that spoke with him, and he was being carried by the Spirit into a wilderness. Now we really don't know of which wilderness. Could be the Judean wilderness. We just don't know which wilderness he was carried into. But when he was carried into the wilderness, into a place of solace, there he received this vision of a woman. And if you remember, in the scriptures, a woman is associated with the church. In fact, Jesus, the church is the bride of Christ. And the church is spoken of in a couple of places as being the wife. And we see in Revelation that the church will be officially wed. So when you think of a woman, when you think of a religious order or a church, and with that thought in mind, he said that he saw a woman sitting upon a scarlet-colored beast that was full of blasphemies. That's those that speak evil of God and dignities, having 7 heads and 10 horns. Well, if you turn back over to Revelation chapter 13, we know exactly who this beast is. He is the head of the confederation of 10 nations, 10 crowns, the revived Roman Empire. He's the first beast. Now remember the devil's trinity. You've got the first beast, the second beast of Revelation chapter 19, and then we've got the dragon. So the dragon the first beast, the second beast, make up the devil's trinity. So, John sees this woman sitting on the back of this beast. Now, all of you that are at all familiar with riding of a horse, or you know that they have reins, and in order to control the horse, you just pull the reins right or left, and the horse is trained to go in the direction that you want him to go. So this woman is sitting upon the back of the beast. And you say, well, is she actually manipulating the beast? Yes. And he allows her to for a span of time, mainly the first 3.5 years. He allows this religious apostate church to ride up on his back because she's beneficial to him in getting his kingdom established. Now, during the first 3.5 years of the tribulation, we see that the beast is establishing himself. He comes in a mode of peace. He advocates peace, and he's a genius, able to answer all the world's questions and solve all the world's problems. So he's getting himself established. And then he uses her. He allows her to manipulate. Now, down through history, the Catholic Church has used the government to her advantage, and she's dictated policy, especially in the realm of religion, over the years. So the same procedure continues in the tribulation. She's convenient because of her being so popular with all of the peoples of the world. He allows her to use him, but in reality, he is gaining momentum and power as she rides upon his back. That's for 3.5 years. Okay, so we see that the 7 heads represent the full authority, universal power. 7 is the number of completeness, so the 7 heads denote his achieving universal power. And of course, the 10 horns are the 10 toes of Nebuchadnezzar's image. Remember back in Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar saw this image, he had this dream, and Daniel interpreted the dream for him. And the head of gold and the feet of brass and clay, but on these 2 legs, which represents the 2 wings of the Roman Empire, you got and the 10 toes, 5 on each foot, represent 10 kingdoms. And Daniel also notes that these are kings that shall arise. So when we get to Revelation chapter 13, we see that this kingdom that the beast rules over is made up of 10 nations that confederate with him. And we believe that today to arise in the form of the common market, 10 common market nations called the European Community. And now today it's much larger, but it started out with 10 nations. So now let's move on down to the next verse. And the woman was arrayed in purple, scarlet color, decked with gold, with precious stones, pearls, having a golden cup in her hand, full of abominations and filthiness of her fornications. That speaks of her wealth. This religious monster, this apostate church, is very, very wealthy. I mean, she's literally drained the earth of her resources. We think of her being universal. Today you have Protestantism and Catholicism, and at one time everything was under the Catholic Church. And Catholic, by the way, means universal. And everything was under the Catholic Church. And then Luther brought about the Reformation, Zinnick, and all of these others that pulled away from the Catholic Church, forming Protestantism. And then, of course, we as Baptists think that we're a separate group still. But since that time, there's been an effort through the National Council of Churches, the World Council of Churches, a movement called ecumenicism, which is trying to bring everything back under one head. Well, after the rapture occurs, obviously all the religious and denominations and those that are left behind will be brought once again under the control of this woman. As we consider the power that she displays and the wealth that she has, you can understand why the beast would allow her to ride upon his back for a period of time. But look at verse 5. In the latter part of verse 4, a golden cup in her hand full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. Now remember, the kings and the inhabitants of the earth had committed these adulterous acts with her. And in verse 5, upon her forehead was the name written. Now, in the Roman era, the prostitutes of that day wore a headband, and they would have their name written on the headband, the prostitutes would. In verse 5, and upon the forehead was written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots, and the abomination of the earth. All of that is upon the forehead of this woman. Now remember, this woman is a religious apostate church. An apostate church. This is real interesting in verse 6. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints and the blood of martyrs, the martyrs of Jesus, the blood of the saints and the martyrs of Jesus. In other words, she not only has been responsible for leading the world to worship idols, and she is guilty of massacring and slaughtering many of the believers of the Lord Jesus Christ. Now, if you'll remember back some time ago, I asked, and I think, Molly, you got Fox's Book of Martyrs. I don't know what actually happened to it, but we have a copy here somewhere. And Fox's Book of Martyrs speaks of the Protestant history when death and suffering came at the hands of the Catholic Church. There was a period of between 1200 AD and 1500 AD that the church was responsible for the slaughter. Even during the Spanish Inquisition, it's estimated that the church killed between 50 and 68 million people, put them to death. And of course, you know that the Apostle Paul was beheaded in Rome. And many of the apostles were put to death. But this is later than the time of Christ and the time of the New Testament. But in between 12 AD and 15 AD, about a 300-year period there, the church was responsible for the slaughter of millions of people. And this is a statement that I wrote down. The Church of Rome has shed more blood than any other institution that has ever existed on the face of the earth. That includes Nazi Germany. So this, you can understand this statement, that this woman is drunk with the blood of the saints and the martyrs of Jesus. And he said, when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration. And in verse 7, and the angel said unto me, wherefore dost thou marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carried her, which hath the 7 heads and the 10 horns. So the mystery is, and John was baffled and wondered about her and how she gained her power and how she gained her strength. And so the mystery is revealed in verses 8 through 18. Verses 8 through 18. And let's look at it. And the beast, remember she's riding up on the beast. And the beast that thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottom. So the beast existed. That's the empire. That's the empire. It existed. And then in 476 AD, the empire collapsed. 476 AD, Rome, the Roman Empire fell. But it was to be revived. There was a period when it was not. And during our lifetime, we've seen the revision of the Roman Empire in the form of the United States of Europe, the EU, the European Community. So we see that as a result of the formation, starting out with 10 nations, and has now become a very powerful entity in the world. And if you'll remember, I stated that whenever this confederation of nations gets to the right point, they will elect a president. They already have a constitution. They already, and most all of Europe, just recently, Great Britain pulled out of the EU. But they have a common set of regulations. They have plans for a common government, a common military. Everything is common among the EU nations. And eventually, they will elect a president. And I believe, and have felt this way for a long time, that once they elect a president, that he will be the first beast of Revelation chapter 13. The first beast of Revelation chapter 13. So he was, and he was not, and then of course he's revived. And whenever you get to looking in Revelation chapter 13, if you'll turn back over there, I'll point something out to you. Revelation chapter 13. If you'll remember the beast the beast was wounded. The beast was wounded in Revelation chapter 13. Look at verse 3. And I saw one of his heads as it was wounded to death. But what happened? His deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered. So that explains what we're seeing here in this verse. The empire existed, and then it was not, because it fell in 476 AD. And then, of course, it comes back in the revision of the empire through the assistance of the European community. Is that clear, Dick? Okay. All right. So, and of course it will go into perdition or damnation. And we're going to see that a little later on when the Lord comes in the air. And the battle of Armageddon, he defeats the forces of the beast. And Jimmy Dale, he'll then take the beast, the false prophet, and cast them into the lake of fire, which is the second death. So he goes into perdition. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life. I've already reminded you that the book of life contains the names of every person that's already been born. Then the Lamb's book of life contains the names of those who are washed in the blood of the Lamb. And then, of course, the book of records. 3 books that you need to keep in mind. And so he's talking about those names who were not written. If you're not saved in the final analysis, and your name is not in the Lamb's book of life, it will be erased from the book of life. And that indicates that you never ever existed. When folks are cast into the abyss, it will be as though they never ever existed. All right. And back in verse 8, and they beheld the beast that was, and is not, and yet is. So the beast, which is an empire here, existed, he was not, and then he's revived. The empire is revived. And here is the mind which hath wisdom. Of course, wisdom is necessary. Wisdom comes from God. But those that have a mind of wisdom, the 7 heads are 7 mountains or hills on which the woman sits. All of you that have seen a brochure of Rome, most of the time it will say the city of 7 hills. Rome has been known for ages as the city of 7 hills. So we note that this woman, Babylon, the religious order, is located in Rome. And so with that in mind, let's move on to verse 10. And there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, and 1 is not. Let me show you the 7, and then I'll tell you about the 5. The 7 kings are Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, the Medes, the Persians, the Greeks, and of course Rome. That makes 7. 7 kings: Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, the Medes, the Persians, Greece, and Rome. 5 are fallen. They've already, they no longer exist. The 5 that are fallen is Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, and Greece. They're fallen. Now, so there are 10 horns. And he says in 7 kings, 5 are fallen. One is, that's the Roman Empire. And the other is not yet come. And when he cometh, he must continue for a space of time. And he becomes the eighth, which is the beast of Revelation chapter 13. So you've got the 7th is the revived Roman Empire, and the 8th that he'll talk about is the beast of Revelation chapter 13. And verse 12, the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings which have received a kingdom, not a kingdom as yet, but they receive their power as kings 1 hour with the beast. Now turn back over to Daniel real quick like, and I'll show you something in chapter 7, verse 24. This is an interesting statement. And the 10 horns out of the kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise. Those, the 10 kings that shall arise. And another shall arise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and shall subdue 3 kings. So you need, when you're looking at verse 12, you need to keep that verse in Daniel, verse 24, in mind. The 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings which have received, have not received a kingdom as yet, but they receive power for 1 hour with the beast. That's the kingdoms that make up this confederation. They have one mind. They have one power. They're of one power. And they get their strength from the beast, which gets his strength from the dragon, who is the devil. So we see that the devil, who is next to God, the most powerful personality in all the world. He's not omnipotent. He's not omnipresent. He's not omniscient. But with that diabolical host of demons that he has at his disposal, he is a powerful foe in the world. And I mentioned, and look at verse 14, and these make war, talking about these kings, and this is the battle of Armageddon that he's talking about. They make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them, and the Lord of lords and King of kings, he will destroy them in the battle of Armageddon. And he saith unto me, the waters, and I quoted this verse earlier, the waters which thou sawest, where the whore sitteth, are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. The 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore. Now this is where they turn upon her. Remember, she's riding upon his back. Now the decision is made by the 10 kingdoms that make up his empire. They all agree that they're going to turn on the mother of harlots, and they destroy her. They take her wealth and make her desolate and naked. They strip her clean. They get rid of her, and that's in the middle of the tribulation period, whenever he throws her off his back and the kings of the earth devour her resources. And I love verse 17. You say, well, the devil is running the show. But I want you to see something. This is important. This is beautiful. God hath put it into their hearts to fulfill his will. Can you believe it? That all that goes on during the tribulation period, God is using it to fulfill his will. It just goes to show you that regardless of what men conjure up and what men desire to do, they are ultimately fulfilling the will of God. So that's why we have the Bible, and why the Bible is a reliable source, because God knows every event and how things will ultimately turn out. So God can record that in advance. What is prophecy? History pre-written. That's what prophecy is. History pre-written. So the Lord tells us exactly what's going to transpire and how it will all turn out. And it's because he's working his will. I can ultimately say that God's will, Patricia, be done. He's manipulating everything, working everything to fulfill his purpose. Now look at verse 18. The woman which thou sawest is a great city. Back over, if you'll look back to chapter 14, verse 8, Babylon is called the great city. See that in verse 8? Babylon is called, Babylon the great is fallen. Babylon is fallen, the great city. Why did she fall? Because she had made the inhabitants of the earth to drink of her fornications, her idol and false worship. So, we'll stop that, Patricia. Appreciate you being